In the spring of 793, a monk named Alcuin of York sat down and wrote a letter to the King of Northumbria that contained what may be the most understated sentence in the entire history of the British Isles. He wrote that the heathens had desecrated the sanctuaries of God, and that the church of Lindisfarne had been plundered and trampled underfoot by pagans. What Alcuin did not mention was that the monks had been dragged into the sea, that the altar had been stripped of everything silver, that the library, one of the greatest in the Christian world, had been partially burned, and that the survivors spent the following weeks collecting the bodies of their brothers from the tide line. He treated it as a theological problem. The Norse raiders who made it happen treated it as a Tuesday. And the thing that should genuinely disturb you about that story is that by 870 AD, this was not a shocking aberration. It was a business model. There were an estimated 40 to 50,000 Norse raiders active in the North Atlantic world during the 9th century, operating out of fjord settlements in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, running expeditions that could last anywhere from a single coastal season to 3 years. You would not have survived any of this. And over the next several minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why. Not as a victim on the English shore, but as one of the men doing the raiding. Now let me take you inside the ship first, because the ship is where your life begins and ends, and because almost everything people think they know about Viking longships turns out to be half right in ways that matter enormously. The vessel you are standing in is somewhere between 15 and 30 meters long, depending on the raid's ambition and the chieftain's wealth. The Gokstad ship, excavated in Norway in 1880 and dated to roughly 890 AD, gives us the best surviving example. 23 meters, built from 16 strakes of overlapping oak planking, flexible enough to twist several degrees in heavy seas without splitting. That flexibility is the entire point. You are not riding a rigid hull across the North Sea. You are riding something that moves with the water like a living thing, which is the only reason you survive the crossing at all. The crossing itself takes between 3 and 5 days from the Norwegian coast to the Northumbrian shore, depending on wind, and you spend every one of those days and nights in open air on an open deck with no shelter, no enclosed space, and no sanitation arrangements beyond the side of the boat, and whatever the wind decides to do with the results. You are also cold in a way that modern people genuinely cannot calibrate. The North Sea in early spring runs between 4 and 8 degrees Celsius. The wind off the water drops the felt temperature considerably below that. You have wool. You have animal fat rubbed into your clothing. You have the body heat of the 30 to 40 men packed around you. None of it is enough, and you know it is not enough. And you row anyway because the alternative is to drift and die more slowly. Here is the thing about Viking raiders that most people get completely wrong. They were not the wild berserkers of popular imagination, at least not primarily. The saga literature, the Heimskringla, the various kings' sagas compiled in the 12th and 13th centuries, does describe berserkers, warriors who entered a battle trance and fought without regard for injury. But archaeological evidence from mass grave sites in Repton, Derbyshire, where a Viking great army wintered in 873 to 874 AD, tells a more complicated story. The bones recovered there show healed fractures, old injuries, signs of sustained physical labor over years. These were professional men. They had survived previous raids. They had come back. The berserker is the exception. The professional is the norm. Your weapons cost more than most English peasants earned in 2 years. A sword of the period, a Ulfbert blade if you could afford one, with its distinctive inlaid inscription and high carbon steel that would not be replicated in Europe for another 5 centuries, ran to the equivalent of several cows in trade value. Most raiders carried axes, which were cheaper to produce, faster to replace, and brutally effective in the confined spaces where most of the actual fighting happened. You also carry a round shield of lime wood with an iron boss at the center, approximately 80 centimeters in diameter, which is both your primary defense and, when the situation calls for it, an offensive weapon in its own right. The shield wall is real. The sagas describe it. The archaeology confirms it. You know how to lock your shield with the man beside you and push. And it was into this world of professional violence, calculated logistics, and 9 months of planning for 3 weeks of action, that the English coast of 870 AD arrived like a standing invitation. England in 870 is not a unified country. It is 4 kingdoms, Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and Wessex, in various states of political dysfunction, and 3 of the 4 are already compromised. The great heathen army, as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle calls it, arrived in East Anglia in 865 and has been methodically dismantling English political structures ever since. King Edmund of East Anglia was captured in 869 and executed. The sources say he was tied to a tree and used for archery practice, then beheaded, which the medieval church later found sufficiently dramatic to make him a saint. By 870, Northumbria has already fallen. Mercia is negotiating. Wessex under a young king named Alfred is the last serious resistance, and even Alfred is paying tribute to buy time. This is the world you are raiding into, not a world of organized resistance and fortified coasts, a world of burned monasteries and abandoned estates and local lords trying to decide whether fighting or paying is the better survival strategy. The monasteries are the primary targets because the monasteries are where the wealth is. The silver altar pieces, the illuminated manuscripts with their jeweled covers, the livestock, the grain stores, the slaves. The word thrall, meaning a person held in bondage, enters the English language directly from Old Norse during this period. That tells you everything you need to know about the scale of the human trafficking operation running alongside the material plunder. Now, let me take you inside what happens when the raid actually begins, because the logistics are not what you imagine. You beach the ship at low tide on a river estuary or a sheltered cove. The Norse word vik, from which the term Viking likely derives, means precisely this kind of inlet. You do not announce yourself. The element of surprise is the entire tactical advantage, and you protect it carefully. A monastery like Lindisfarne or Crowland has no walls worth discussing, no garrison, and no warning system beyond whatever a terrified shepherd can communicate on foot. You are moving faster than information. By the time any organized response reaches you, you are already back on the water. The violence is fast and functional. You are not there to hold territory. You are there to extract portable wealth and leave before anyone with a horse and a sword can organize a response. The entire raid from beaching to departure can run under 2 hours for a well-practiced crew. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records raid after raid in this period with the same formula. The Danes came, they plundered, they departed. The formula is accurate. It was a formula because it worked. What you bring home, if you survive, is silver by weight, textiles, slaves, livestock, and occasionally something more interesting. A craftsman with a useful skill, a churchman worth ransoming, a piece of information about which coast had the most wealth and the least defense. You winter in Scandinavia, or, increasingly by the 870s, in England itself, in fortified camps like the one at Repton, and you plan the next season. You would have crossed the North Sea in open water at 4 degrees Celsius, sleeping on a rowing bench for 4 days. You would have raided a coast where organized resistance had already collapsed, and the primary question was how much silver you could carry. You would have operated inside a professional violence economy that was, by any honest measure, one of the most effective military and economic systems in 9th century Europe. And you would have done all of it knowing that the man beside you had done it before and come back, which was the only evidence that coming back was possible at all. The only difference between you and the men who did not come back is that nobody recorded their names either.